I recall a forest. In the forest I recall a single hidden pool, secluded from the world and deeply set in the shadow of a tall oak tree, blessed by the sun, and learned in the discipline of a storm. Alone she dreams in a world turned upside down, and fishes for her golden fish in silence, and no one knows what is within her heart. Habrecca, The Pond, Bialik, 1905.
I would say it's a diverse town, friendly, with very high taxes.
It was a quiet little farming community, and friendly people, and good hunting.
I've lived here since 1946, and I think it is a beautiful town. I absolutely love Mount Vernon.
I'm a civil engineer by profession, and I'm used to looking at a lot of maps. I do a lot of hydrology work and hazardous waste work, and so I have a lot of United States Geological Survey maps in my office, USGS maps. So when I was considering moving to Mount Vernon, certainly it's natural for me to pick up a map and have a look around at all the topography and the various features. And in the course of doing so, I noted a small little pond right here called Jew Pond. And I was a little surprised to see that name in this day and age on the map, but there it is. That's the official United States Geological Survey name for this pond. There was an event here last summer where this pond had an accumulation of a bacteria called cyanobacteria, which is actually a toxic bacteria. It's a naturally occurring bacteria, but it is comes into bloom and propagates rapidly when there's a lot of heat, hot days, or excess nutrients. As the town's health officer, I was involved in that whole decision-making to close off this park until the bacteria dissipated.
The reason I wrote a story about it for the newspaper is that not this last summer, but the summer beforehand, the pond was closed by the state. The state regularly closes certain beaches to swimming when there are algae blooms. And they closed Jew Pond, which is unusual because it's actually not a state-controlled pond and it's very complicated anyway. But it was the first time it ever happened, and in order to do this, there was a little announcement saying we've closed Jew Pond, which is the first time really that the name had been in print and that really a lot of people realized that that was the name.
Where they hadn't before. Before it was known mostly as either Carlton Pond, because this park was donated by the Carlton family some time ago, and there's a sign right over there that says Carlton Park. When it was publicized about the algae bloom and people became aware of the name Jew Pond, I know a lot of us kind of cringed that our town would be characterized as having a pond that could be offensive to people and viewed as anti-Semitic. As a number of us just informally talking thought it was really not a very good name to have for a pond, and it might be worth consider changing. I did speak to several people that have a Jewish tradition, and they were not happy about it either.
I learned about Jew Pond, I believe, in September when I got a phone call from a reporter in Israel that had somehow heard about it and was working on an article, and she wondered if the Jewish Federation was going to do anything to try and change the name or what our response was to this issue. And that actually was the first time I had heard about it. It's not an awful word like the presidential candidate Perry, I believe, was at a hunting camp, and they had a name with a strong or negative connotation, but Jew Pond, like Jew lawyer or Jew politician, just does not sound kosher to many members of our community. So hearing Jew Pond, it reminds us of phrases like Jewing down the price, And I said earlier, talking pejoratively about a Jew lawyer or Jew politician, if the name had been Jewish Pond, we would not be having this conversation, and we would not have had any objection.
Because I'm kind of an old timer, I would like to keep it just the same way it is. You know, they call the pond up by my house there on Purgatory Road, they call it Stearns Pond. Well, the people that own it now, their name isn't Stearns, it's Dave Cruden, but they still call it Stearns Pond under the original owner, which was Mr. Stearns. And Houghton's Pond, up on the Turnpike, the same way. It's not owned by Mr. Houghton anymore, but they still call it Houghton Pond. And I think Jew Pond was the original name, and I'd like to see it stay the same.
I think as long as the old people are here, we will always call it Jew Pond. And I think in this day and age, we do not consider it an insult. It's just history.
Mount Vernon were on a hill, and so in the days before air conditioning and when there was tuberculosis in the summertime, a lot of hill communities built bed and breakfast, what are now called bed and breakfasts, hotels, things like that. So the people from Boston, the cities would come up in the summertime. Usually the families would come up. The men would stay in the city and work, and the families would come up and live all summer, where it was cooler and, in theory, healthier. The biggest one in town was Grand Hotel, built on top of Grand Hill, and a man named George Bates owned it for several decades. And part of what he did was he made that pond. They had a little tiny golf course next to it, a 9-hole golf course. And so that's how it existed. And it was apparently known as Spring Pond. You can find, there's a map in the Historical Society that shows it labeled as Spring Pond. The hotels went under basically when automobiles were invented, because people could drive to new places. They didn't have to come here. They used to come here on the train. And so they could go anywhere they wanted, and so places like Mount Vernon sort of faded. And the hotel finally went under, and it was bought in, I forget the date, late 20s, 28, 29, something like that, by a couple of attorneys from Boston who were Jewish. And they bought it specifically to create a hotel that would be welcoming to Jewish clients, who were generally not allowed in most hotels in New Hampshire at the time, and most hotels anywhere, I imagine. And in fact, in the Historical Society, we have some of the various brochures that were put out by George Bates at the Grand Hotel over the years. And one of them, most of them don't say this, but one of them has in the very back little tiny words that says something along the lines of, clients of Hebrew persuasion are not welcome. So the Grand Hotel itself was closed to Jews for at least part of its history. So a couple of Jewish attorneys bought it to make it welcoming to Jewish clients. Never opened it, but as part of their plans, they renamed the pond Lake Serene.
That was one of the stories that my husband's family told me, that they wanted to enlarge it, and they didn't. So the natives said that they wanted to call it Lake Serene, and it never materialized.
How did the name come about? How did Jew Pond start?
Well, probably it was an insult.
Did you always call Jew Pond when you first came to town? Was it always known as that?
Yes. I think it is a very tranquil place. I always enjoy riding by it or walking down and standing. I like Jew Pond. I'm glad it's there.
When word spread that this was actually called Jew Pond, and that is the official name, when the algae bloom occurred, I looked around to figure out what the procedures would be to change the name. I thought it was the right thing to do. I still think it's the right thing to do. And I provided the information to, I thought, the folks that would be most appropriate, the decision makers, to get the ball rolling on that.
And what was their overall opinion?
The only thing I heard about it was they didn't consider it at that time. Over a year went by and there was no word that any action had been taken, so I decided to get the ball rolling myself, and I submitted the name through the online process, name change on the online process.
And nobody's ever complained about the name until it got into the papers. I mean, not one citizen in town, and I'm sure there's several Jewish families in town, they never complained. I know our town clerk is a Jewish woman, and she never complained, and we would never offend anybody intentionally, and so nobody was offended, so we just didn't do anything. And so we just decided to put it to the people, have them vote on it. The opinion is split 50-50, you can and you can't. So we just don't know, and we're not lawyers. We don't know all the legal procedures to do. So but I know the people have the final say on everything. It's in town. This is the way it should be. So I think we'll be okay. I think most people are sensitive to the fact that people could be offended by it, and I hope it goes through like that.
If they do change it, then it should be called Carlton Pond.
Do I think Mount Vernon should change the name of the pond? No.
It's not, you don't find it anti-Semitic or...
No, I don't. And I love the idea that it's Carlton Park. The Carltons have done a lot for Mount Vernon, and it's a tribute to them.
It's just the name Jew Pond is so unusual and stands out so much compared to what things are named these days that I think it strikes people as odd. And if it had a better reason for being named Jew Pond, if, for example, it had been owned by the most famous Jewish person in New Hampshire or something like that, if there was a real strong reason for it being called that, I think there'd be more support for it, a real historical reason. But there really isn't. It just sort of fell into it as kind of a snide joke. And I think that's part of the reason that there's opposition to it. The only reason to keep the name is because it has been that name for a long time. So if you're going to change it to something that's, that has some other historical reference. So Carlton Pond would be the obvious one.
Thank you.